Yeah.
Okay, one sec.
Om Tavakathamritam Tapta Jivanam Kaviviritam Kalmashapaham Shravanamangalam Srimadatam Bhuviganantiye Bhurida Janaha. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our monthly class on the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. Last month, we started discussing Sri Ramakrishna's visit to the great Bengali Pandit Vidyasagar, Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar, which literally means, his last name literally means the vast ocean of knowledge or learning. So it's an apt name for him. We're going to continue our discussion of Sri Ramakrishna's visit. And today, we're going to really get into Sri Ramakrishna's philosophical teachings to Vidyasagar. It's very deep and interesting. And there are a lot of interesting translation issues, some discrepancies I want to point to. And so let me begin by mentioning that where we left off last time is the end of chapter 2 in the Bengali original. And we're going to start with the beginning of chapter 3. So I'll remind you guys again, because you probably forgot. Nikhanji usually doesn't break up the chapters in the way that M does in the original Bengali. His chapters are much longer. So one of Nikhanji's chapters combines multiple chapters in the original Bengali. We've gotten through 2 of those chapters. We're going to start on chapter 3, Tritiya Parichhed. And the chapter title is interesting. M gives these titles himself. Thakur Sri Ramakrishna. That's obvious. Then Gyan Jog ba Vedanta Vichar. Jnana Yoga or Vedanta Vichara. This is interesting. I mean, I would quibble with M on this and say I'm not sure that this is the best description of what's to come. The reason why I've entitled today's class Brahman and Maya is because I think that's really more the topic of the class. But you can decide for yourself after you hear today's teachings, what Sri Ramakrishna says to Vidyasagar, whether it's accurate to describe this chapter as Jnana Yoga, meaning the path of knowledge, and Vedanta Vichara, reasoning on Vedanta. There are definitely Vedantic themes, but Jnana Yoga I don't really see here exactly in that way. But maybe that could be an open question. Okay, so now, to start the chapter, one problem is the entire first paragraph of the Bengali is omitted. Not there in the English. Okay, so I'm going to read it to you in Bangla first and then translate it myself, roughly. Vidyasagar Mahapandit. Vidyasagar was a great Pandit. যখন সংস্কৃত কলেজে পড়িতেন তখন নিজের শ্রেণীর সর্বোৎকৃষ্ট ছাত্র ছিলেন. When he was a student in Sanskrit college, he was the best student in his batch, in his cohort. প্রতি পরীক্ষায় প্রথম হইতেন ও স্বর্ণ পদকাদি, medal. Sometimes M himself will add the English words, the translation of some Bengali words into English. And so this is a case where স্বর্ণ পদকাদি, he's then adding in parentheses, medal. Ba chatrabritti paiten. In every exam, he got a medal or, chatrabritti, just some, like the best marks, kind of that kind of thing. Krome, সংস্কৃত কলেজের প্রধান অধ্যাপক হইয়াছিলেন. Eventually, he became the head instructor of this Sanskrit college himself. He was the best student in the class, and eventually he went on to become the head instructor in that same college. তিনি সংস্কৃত ব্যাকরণ ও সংস্কৃত কাব্যে বিশেষ পারদর্শিতা লাভ করিয়াছিলেন. He attained special mastery in, expertise in 2 subjects, Sanskrit grammar and Sanskrit poetry. Okay, and then the final sentence, which is omitted from the English, অধ্যবসায় গুণে নিজে চেষ্টা করিয়া ইংরেজি শিখিয়াছিলেন. He adds here, M adds, that he learned English completely on his own. He wasn't actually taught English in school formally, but he's so brilliant that he learned it on his own. Okay, so that whole paragraph, not there in Nikhanji's translation. Now, Now let me start by reading Nikalanji's translation. And yeah, after one paragraph, we'll pause and discuss a little, and then we'll go on. So, Vidyasagar was very reticent about giving religious instruction to others. He had studied Hindu philosophy. Once, when M had asked him his opinion of it, Vidyasagar had said, "I think the philosophers have failed to explain what was in their minds." But in his daily life, he followed all the rituals of Hindu religion and wore the sacred thread of a Brahman. And then Nikalanji's translation continues. There's a sentence omitted, which I'll come to, but I'll continue with Nikalanji first. About God, he had once declared, "It is indeed impossible to know him. What then should be our duty? It seems to me that we should live in such a way that if others followed our example, this very earth would be heaven. Everyone should try to do good to the world." This is very interesting, a lot. So the first thing I want to point to is the omitted sentence and exactly where it occurs. Right after the sentence, "But in his daily life, he followed all the rituals of Hindu religion and wore the sacred thread of a Brahman," the following sentence in the original Bengali is missing. "বাংলায় যে সকল পত্র লিখিতেন তাহাতে শ্রী শ্রী হরিশরণম ভগবানের এই বন্দনা আগে করিতেন." Anytime he wrote a letter in Bengali, he would, at the top of each letter, he would write Shri Shri Hari Sharanam, which means I take refuge at the lotus feet of Shri Hari, God. I think that's a very interesting detail that's omitted from, because it suggests that he definitely had faith in God. Otherwise, we might think that he's just a kind of agnostic or something like that, but he definitely had faith in God. He believed in God. Okay, so anyway, so that's one significant sentence that's omitted. Then, Vidyasagar's statement about God is really interesting. So let's try to parse it a little bit. It is indeed impossible to know him. So we can't know God. I believe in God, but it's impossible to know God. And so what should we do?
Read Kant.
We should what?
Read Kant.
Yeah, well, thank you. Good. It's good that right, because you studied philosophy at UCLA. So, exactly. So this sounds a lot like Kant. And even the second part, how should we live in this world? We should try to do good to the world. And specifically it says, it seems to me that we should live in such a way that if others followed our example, this very earth would be heaven. This is also Kantian, actually. Do you know? What part of Kant is he thinking of there?
It's a categorical imperative.
Yeah, very good. Okay, good. So, see, he's the head of the class, like Vidyasagar. Okay. Okay, so let me first mention...
Literally.
Huh?
Literally is head.
Literally, yeah. Oh, yeah, that too, yeah. Okay, so in his philosophical masterpiece, The Critique of Pure Reason, Kritik der reinen Vernunft, Kant... this is 1871. He writes in the preface, one of the main purposes of the entire book, he says, "I have had to deny knowledge in order to make room for faith." Knowledge of what? Of supersensible entities like God, the immortal soul, and so on. Okay? So notice, this sounds very similar to what Vidyasagar is saying. He denies that we can have knowledge of God, direct realization of God in any sense. At the same time, he's not saying we should be atheists, that we shouldn't believe in God. We should believe in God. But we should believe in God while also humbly admitting that we can never actually know God. We should have faith, basically. Okay? So this is very similar to Kant. Now, whether he read Kant or not, I kind of looked it up quickly on Google and I couldn't find anything. It's not the most reliable source, but I don't know. I mean, it's entirely possible, but I don't know. But what's even more striking is where he says, what should be our duty? It seems to me that we should live in such a way that if others followed our example, this very earth would be heaven. Everyone should try to do good to the world. As Nish points out, this is very reminiscent of Kant's, at least one of the three major formulations of Kant's categorical imperative. Kant is notoriously complicated and ambiguous, sometimes confusing, as a philosopher, brilliant philosopher. But so he came up with this idea of what he called the categorical imperative, which is why we should be ethical and like how we can be ethical. But he gave three very different formulations of the same categorical imperative. And so I'm going to read you one of them, the one that's most similar to the one here. Act only according to that maxim, whereby you can at the same time will that it should become a universal law. This is technical language, but the basic idea is whatever you do, act in such a way that if everybody else did what you did, that the world would be a good place. This is almost exactly what Vidyasagar is saying. As I said, whether he actually read Kant or not, unclear to me. He may have. But if not, great minds can think alike. Okay. So that's Kant. So I see him as a kind of Kantian agnostic. That's how I see it. Kantian agnostic means, as I said, not like atheism or anything like that. It means it's not possible for anybody, not even Sri Ramakrishna, nobody, to know God. Just because our minds are fundamentally limited. Okay? But we should nonetheless have faith in God, even if we can't know God. Okay? Let's continue now. Sri Ramakrishna's conversation now turned to the knowledge of Brahman. Master, Brahman is beyond vidya and avidya, knowledge and ignorance. It is beyond maya, the illusion of duality. The world consists of the illusory duality of knowledge and ignorance. It contains knowledge and devotion, and also attachment to kamani kanchan, righteousness and unrighteousness, good and evil. But Brahman is unattached to these. Good and evil apply to the jiva, the individual soul, as do righteousness and unrighteousness. But Brahman is not at all affected by them. One man may read the Bhagavata by the light of a lamp, and another may commit a forgery by that very light. But the lamp is unaffected. The sun sheds its light on the wicked as well as on the virtuous. You may ask, how then can one explain misery and sin and unhappiness? The answer is that these apply only to the jiva. Brahman is unaffected by them. There is poison in a snake, but though others may die if bitten by it, the snake itself is not affected by the poison. So let's pause here. A lot more deep philosophical stuff going on here, and more translation issues. Before I get into further translation issues, let me add a disclaimer, which I've given this disclaimer before, but I feel like maybe it's time to mention it one more time, just to get into some people's heads. When I point out discrepancies between the original Bengali Kathamrita and Nikhilanandaji's wonderful English translation of the Kathamrita, I'm not criticizing Nikhilanandaji. I'm not finding fault with him. That's a silly way of thinking about what I'm doing. The aim in this entire class is to understand Sri Ramakrishna's teachings. The first step in doing so is to know what Sri Ramakrishna's teachings are. Before we actually interpret them, we have to make sure that we're actually getting what he's saying. And that means that, and we shouldn't pretend that Sri Ramakrishna spoke to anybody in English. He knew a few dozen English words, like thank you and philosophy and things like that, interesting English words, but he spoke in Bengali, not English. And there's no such thing as a perfect translation. There's not a single text that has been perfectly translated into another language, because there are nuances, subtleties, untranslatable terms in every single language across this world that cannot be perfectly translated. So please keep this in mind. And so one more thing I'll add is that I think of all the available translations of the Kathamrita, Nikhilanandaji is by far the best because of his native knowledge of Bengali, but also because he had an extraordinary mastery of English. I think he was trained as a journalist before he became a monk, and it shows. Just the sense of style. So I have nothing but praise for his translation. At the same time, it's almost 100 years old, and as I said, there's no such thing as a perfect translation. And so what I'm suggesting is we use Nikhilanandaji's translation as an indispensable foundation or base. But that I think that it can and should be revised in certain places, updated, corrected in certain places. That's all. So that's my suggestion. So in that spirit, I want to point out a couple things. Brahman is beyond vidya and avidya, knowledge and ignorance. That's okay, because the Bangla here is Brahmo, vidya or avidya par. It's beyond vidya and avidya. But then it gets interesting. Next sentence. It is beyond maya, the illusion of duality. We get the word illusion here. Brahma satyam jagat mithya. Brahman alone is real. The world is maya, which is an illusion. But what is the original Bangla? It's a very short sentence. Tini mayatit. That's it. Tini mayatit. Tini means God, Brahman. Mayatit. Atita means beyond. Maya means maya. Brahman is beyond maya. Where's the illusion of duality? Nowhere. That's added by Nikhilanandaji. I think because of his leanings toward Shankara's Advaita Vedanta. To corroborate my suspicion, the very next sentence, he says, the world consists of the illusory duality of knowledge and ignorance. Again, illusory duality. What's the original Bengali? E jogote bidya maya, abidya maya dui ache. Where's the illusory duality? Nowhere. In fact, it's even more, the translation obscures more than that, because listen to the Bangla again. E jogote, in this world. Bidya maya means vidya maya. Abidya maya dui ache. You find both vidya maya and avidya maya. And then he immediately goes on to, and now notice here, there's absolutely no question of the illusory duality. There's no illusoriness anywhere here. Okay? And in a second, we'll get to further complexities. But then he explains what is avidya maya and what is vidya maya. Okay? He gives examples. Knowledge and devotion. It contains knowledge and devotion. What side does that fall on? Obviously, vidya maya. The maya of knowledge. These are good spiritual, ethical qualities that help you, that bring you closer to God. And also attachment to kamini kanchan. That falls under, obviously, avidya maya, right? Ignorance, the maya of ignorance. Here, again, the next phrase, righteousness and unrighteousness. This is Nikhilanandaji's translation. Of what words? You would think, but it's not. The words actually are sat and asat. He says, shoto ache, ashoto ache, bhalo ache, abar mondo ache. So, in this world, there's both avidya maya and vidya maya. Then he says, as examples, you find jnana and bhakti, that falls under vidya maya. You also find kamini kanchan, lust and greed, that falls under this avidya maya. And then again he says, shoto ache, ashoto ache. You find sat and you also find asat. Sat falling under vidya maya and you find asat in avidya maya. But how does he himself define sat and asat in a different place? Do you know? I think we talked about this maybe in an earlier class. Exactly. Sat is nitya, the eternal, Ishvara, God, or Brahman. And asat, he says, is not what's unreal and it's not unrighteousness, but it's just that which is impermanent. Everything you see, which is impermanent. Okay, so I think a better translation of sat and asat here would, instead of righteousness and unrighteousness, it would be eternal, the eternal and the transitory. The eternal God would fall under sat, I think, something like that, and then asat would be, and this the impermanent things of this world, or something like that. And part of the reason why, I mean, of course, sat and asat can be interpreted in certain contexts as righteousness and unrighteousness, and I think that's what Nikhilanandaji is thinking of. But I think this context justifies this other interpretation of sat and asat as eternal versus transient. Partly because the very next words are bhalo ache abar mondo ache, good and evil, which Nikhilanandaji, I think, accurately translates. Bhalo just means good, mondo means bad, evil. But righteousness and unrighteousness comes pretty close to that. It seems almost synonymous. And I think that Sri Ramakrishna, there's a reason why he's using these other terms, which are quite different from good and evil, sat and asat. Okay. And the other thing is, what is the status of avidya maya and vidya maya? See, the term Maya, it's very confusing because the term is used in subtly different ways in different schools of Indian thought. Okay, the term Maya is ubiquitous. You find it not just in Advaita Vedanta, but you find it in Ramanuja. You find it in scriptures like Shvetashvatara Upanishad, in the Bhagavad Gita. Maya is all over the place, but it has different meanings in different contexts. And the most common meaning of Maya is illusion, like this world of illusion. Everything is Maya. It means everything is an illusion. It's unreal. It's like a dream. But the question is, in the context of Sri Ramakrishna's teachings, when he uses the term Maya, Avidya Maya, Vidya Maya, does it have that connotation of illusoriness? And I would suggest no. What's my evidence? Well, if you look at other parts of the Gospel, you'll find that he does not ever say, anywhere in the Gospel, that Vidya Maya and Avidya Maya are unreal or illusory. In fact, he says that everything in this world, including both Vidya Maya and Avidya Maya, is a real manifestation of God. God has become both. How do I know this? You want proof? May 24th, 1884. And actually, it's in the context of a very poignant conversation between the future Swami Turiyanandaji, so Hari, the young boy Hari, and Sri Ramakrishna. Sri Ramakrishna is explaining how everything in this world is God's play. And then Turiyanandaji very poignantly says, but this play of God is our death. Khelai je amader pran jay. Sri Ramakrishna, smiling. Please tell me who you are. God alone has become all this. Maya, notice Maya, Jivas, the universe, and the 24 cosmic principles. As the snake I bite, and as the charmer I cure. It is God herself who has become both Vidya and Avidya. She remains deluded by Avidya Maya. Again, with the help of the Guru, she is cured by Vidya Maya. And then he says, ignorance, knowledge, and intimate knowledge. Agyana, Jnana, Vijnana. He specifically is mentioning Vijnana. The Jnani sees that God alone exists and is the doer, that she creates, preserves, and destroys. The Vijnani sees that it is God who has become all this. So I hope it's very clear now. So see, now, I think this context is really important for understanding what he's saying here. Brahman is beyond both Avidya Maya and Vidya Maya, sure. But Brahman is not just transcendent. That would be strictly classical Advaita Vedanta. Sri Ramakrishna, I think, differs in this way. He accepts the transcendent aspect of Brahman while also affirming the immanence of Brahman. Immanence, I-M-M-A-N-E-N-C-E. And there's a term for this, a fancy term in theology and philosophy of religion. It's called panentheism. And I edited an entire book recently, which was published by Routledge last year, called Panentheism in Indian and Western Thought. Yeah.
What's that word again?
Panentheism, P-A-N-E-N-T-H-E-I-S-M. Yeah. And the more familiar term, probably for you and anyone, is pantheism. Pantheism means this world is God, but that God is nothing over and above this world. God's nature is exhausted by this world. God has no transcendent dimension apart from this world. Panentheism says, yes, this world is God, but God is also beyond this world. This, I think, is Sri Ramakrishna's position. So he'll accept the fact that Nirguna Brahman, the impersonal, attributeless Brahman, is completely untouched by Maya, beyond this world, transcendent. At the same time, he'll say, but that same Brahman has become everything. Both Avidya Maya and Vidya Maya. And you have to take both aspects. You can't just cherry pick the transcendent aspect and say, see, he's a follower of Shankara. You see, he equally affirmed both, and I think it's really important to keep that in mind. All right, so let's continue. Oh, so, and the other thing is, the section given, the section heading given to this little section I read in the original Bengali is, interestingly, M uses the English phrase, problem of evil. And then dash, Brahma nirlipto, which means Brahman is unattached. And a third section heading, or like part of a section heading, Jiberi shambonde dukkhadi. sorrow, suffering, etc. are only true from the standpoint of the jiva, the individual soul. So this, I think, is a nice summation of what Sri Ramakrishna is saying. He uses a very beautiful metaphor of a snake, a poisonous snake. This poison in the snake, it kills other people, yet the snake is completely unaffected. And he says, in the same way, God is, not just contains, but actually is, both avidya maya and vidya maya. All the terrible things we see in this world, actually, in a sense, is God, different manifestations of God. That's why Swamiji again and again emphasizes, what is the significance of Kali? Because she embodies both good and evil. The severed head and he says, you wimps who only think that God is the God of good. No! God is also God the terrible. And Swamiji said, may I come back again and again so that I can serve my God the wicked, my God the suffering, my God the... So it's the same kind of idea. But God is not affected. And you might say, well, how is that possible? If God is all the terrible things we see in this world, how can God not be affected? Sri Ramakrishna doesn't give a kind of rational answer to this. He says it's a matter of spiritual experience, and there's some things that can't be explained. It seems to be. Yeah.
This is really liberating to understand this, that God is anger and all bad things. If somebody's angry at you, you can just go, oh, well, this is just another manifestation of God. And,
that's good. That's a nice attitude, because then that's actually productive rather than justifying your own anger. If somebody else gets angry at you, you can say, well, this is also God speaking to me in another form. That's nice, yeah.
The error that I just did also.
But we can still hiss.
Yeah, hiss but don't bite.
Yeah.
It's also a teaching of Sri Ramakrishna.
Still hiss.
Yeah. Yeah.
When terrifying God shows up.
Yeah. Okay, so let's go to the next section. The next section is another new section. So let me read to you the new section heading. M says, and these are all omitted, by the way. Brahma anirbachaniya abhyapadeshyam. And then again in English, M was educated, so the unknown and unknowable. Here again, I just think that M's characterization of what Sri Ramakrishna is saying here is not quite what's being conveyed. So again, I'll leave that up to you guys. Think about it. But this is M section heading. The first part, I get. Brahma anirbachaniya abhyapadesham. It means Brahman is indescribable, ineffable. And then he says the unknown and unknowable with capital U's. Okay? Suggesting that Sri Ramakrishna is talking about God as unknown and unknowable, which seems to bring Sri Ramakrishna quite close to and Vidyasagar, the view that we can't know God. Now, is that accurate? Let's see. Stay tuned. Okay, so let's read. What Brahman is cannot be described. All things in the world, the Vedas, the Puranas, the Tantras, the 6 systems of philosophy. What are the 6 systems of philosophy? Why you go in order? What they're sister schools. So you Nyaya Vaisheshika. Good. Sankhya Yoga. Uttara Mimamsa. Purva Mimamsa and Uttara Mimamsa. Okay. Sankhya, Yoga, Nyaya. So those are sister schools, or whatever you want to call them. I mean, they're pairs. They go together. They go hand in hand. Sankhya, Yoga, Nyaya, Vaisheshika, Purva Mimamsa, Uttara Mimamsa. Uttara Mimamsa is AKA Vedanta. It's just a fancier word for the same thing. Okay, those are the 6 traditional schools of Indian philosophy. That's what's being referred to here. Okay. All things in the world, the Vedas, the Puranas, the Tantras, the 6 systems of philosophy have been defiled, like food that has been touched by the tongue. For they've been read or uttered by the tongue. Only one thing has not been defiled in this way, and that is Brahman. No one has ever been able to say what Brahman is. Vidyasagar to his friends. Oh, that is a remarkable statement. I have learned something new today. Master, a man had 2 sons. The father sent them to a preceptor to learn the knowledge of Brahman. After a few years, they returned from their preceptor's house, meaning Guru, and bowed low before their father. Wanting to measure the depth of their knowledge of Brahman, he first questioned the older of the 2 boys. My child, he said, you have studied all the scriptures. Now tell me, what is the nature of Brahman? The boy began to explain Brahman by reciting various texts from the Vedas. The father did not say anything. Then he asked the younger son the same question, but the boy remained silent and stood with eyes cast down. No word escaped his lips. The father was pleased and said to him, "My child, you have understood a little of Brahman. What it is cannot be expressed in words." Here I just want to point out one brief thing. What Nikalanji is saying about when he's saying all things in the world, including all the scriptures and the 6 systems of philosophy, have been defiled like food that has been touched by the tongue, for they've been read or uttered by the tongue. This is a long-winded way of translating one word, actually, but it's very difficult to translate. He's done a good job, actually, but I just wanted to flag that. Uchishta. And you can only really understand it within an Indian sort of spiritual/cultural context. If there's food which is offered to God, it doesn't even have to be offered to God, but and I start eating it. The moment I eat the food, the rest of it becomes uchishta. And then, and this is very foreign to the Western sensibility, but if I give that food to another person, it's considered to be not just bad manners, but somehow not right. Like one shouldn't give food that you have already eaten to another. A mother can give it to her kid or something, but in general, it's not encouraged because food itself is considered sacred, and that's the basic idea. And the term here is uchishta, and defiled is as good a translation as anything, but you just need to understand the context, the cultural context here. It's not defiled in a more. This is defilement in a kind of spiritual or religious sense. That's the idea. Okay. Yeah.
So I don't know if I quite understand this. So the food is there, it's sacred, and you eat a few bites of it.
Yeah.
Does that mean the other food that's still sitting there is not sacred anymore?
Yeah, except if you're a guru. Then if a guru gives it to you, that becomes guru's prasad.
But I mean, you know, if it's on your plate, that's one thing. But if it's not on your plate,
If it's not on your plate, what do you mean?
If I took a piece of pizza,
No,
you couldn't take a piece of pizza?
No, that would be okay, but take it with a spatula so that your hand doesn't touch it. It's better to do
Their
that.
hands.
Yeah, you know the Seinfeld thing about double dipping? You dipped, and then you dipped again. so that's uchishta. You've made it uchishta the moment you dip once into the bowl of chive, dip or whatever. So double dipping is uchishta, forbidden.
You're not having to transmit disease, like.
That's too kind of medical an explanation. I mean, that might be part of it, but I'm saying that there is a deeper religious significance to it. That's separate from. Nobody's getting sick from eating double dipped, chive dip, but it's still not right. Is the idea from an Indian spiritual standpoint? Yeah. Okay. So let's continue. This is a continuation of the thought. That's why we need to continue reading. I'm actually going to read till the end, and then we'll talk about the remaining stuff. So, men often think they have understood Brahman fully. People, not men. Once an ant went to a hill of sugar. One grain filled its stomach. Taking another grain in its mouth, it started homeward. On its way, it thought, "Next time I shall carry home the whole hill." That is the way shallow minds think. They don't know that Brahman is beyond one's words and thought. However great a man may be, how much can he know of Brahman? Shukadeva and sages like him may have been big ants, but even they could carry at the utmost 8 or 10 grains of sugar. Actually, let me pause here. I think it's better that way. Because now I think we're in a position to ask. Let me ask you. Do you think that M's characterization of this section as the unknown and unknowable is accurate? Is that what Sri Ramakrishna is saying, that God is unknowable? What is he saying here? Kiran, microphone, please.
I mean, I would just say he's just referring that he cannot be completely known. It's knowable, but not
exactly
in its entirety, because it's infinite.
I think that's absolutely right. I think that it would be inaccurate to say that Sri Ramakrishna's view is that God is unknowable. I think he says that the whole of God, the infinitude of God is unknowable, but that people can and have realized aspects of God. And his example, one example he uses elsewhere in the Gospel is, if you want to touch the Ganga, do you have to run your finger from the source of the Ganga in Gangotri or Gomukh, and then run your finger all the way down to South India where you hit Kanyakumari and it goes into the Pacific Ocean? No, or Indian Ocean, sorry. No. You touch the Ganga at any place and you've touched the Ganga. Likewise, you don't have to realize the whole of God. That's silly. And nobody can realize the whole of God. But just realizing some form of God, some aspect of God is enough.
So the question that pops in my mind is, can an avatar know the whole of Brahman, or specifically Ramakrishna?
I don't think so. And I think that's a very good question. I think it's important to keep in mind here. Okay, see, let's think of two other parables that Sri Ramakrishna uses, okay? And let's try to bring them together. One, the famous blind men and the elephant parable. 5 blind men, each touching a different part of the same elephant, arguing with each other. They're all actually touching parts of the elephant, right? Just different parts, which seems to correspond to realization, direct experience of some form or aspect of God, okay? Now the question is, well, then the parable continues. There's one person who can see, who's not blind, sees the whole elephant, and then corrects them and says, don't fight with each other. You're all right because you're touching different parts of the same elephant, right? Who is that person, the person who can see? Seems to be the Vijnani, the person who has seen more of God, more aspects of God. But I think it would be a mistake to push this parable too far and take it too literally, and because then it would mean that the Vijnani realizes the whole of God. So that's why that parable and the chameleon parable is what? Most people see the chameleon only in one color, red, yellow, blue, green. There's one person who's sitting under the tree who sees the chameleon in all the different colors. Sometimes it's colorless. Again, Vijnani. And again, we might be led to think, if we didn't think about the ant parable, that, oh, okay, so the Vijnani knows the whole of God. But that's not accurate. So in my book, in chapter 1 of Infinite Paths to Infinite Reality, I emphasize this. You have to try to be comprehensive when you study and think about Sri Ramakrishna's teachings. And don't cherry pick and don't jump to conclusions on the basis of a single one or two of his teachings. You have to reconcile everything he says. And I think the ant parable is a very useful corrective to and clarification of his chameleon and elephant parables. Because it says, whoa, but don't think for a second that the Vijnani, the person who can see the whole elephant, or the person sitting under the tree who can see the chameleon in different colors, knows the whole of God, because nobody can know the whole of God. And you don't even need to know the whole of God. Okay? So I hope that answers the question.
But it must be an urge that we want to think that we could, because even in the ant situation, it's like, and next time I'm going to get like the whole thing.
Yeah, although
there must be an urge in us, even though it seems absurd to think that we could ever know the whole of Brahman or God or whatever he wants to know the whole of.
I get it.
But I think maybe there's some urge or desire to know more and more and more.
Yeah, I know, but I think you have to be attentive to the tone of that statement. He's being he's kind of making fun of the ant. And suggesting that the ant has a kind of hubris.
And that's kind of how we are. Yeah.
Well, not all of us, maybe. Some people are. I mean,
we're like, oh, I had a spiritual experience. Like, I know all of God, right? Anyway, never mind.
Yeah, no. I mean, I get what you're saying. I mean, there's a certain kind of sense like, why shouldn't we? What's wrong with wanting to know the whole of God? Right? Yeah.
The silliness of thinking that we.
Yeah. Okay. Vijaya? Oh, I see the mic so that people online can hear. Okay. See, যাবার সময় ভাবছে এবার এসে সব পাহাড়টি লয়ে যাব. It's a certain kind of ego that he's suggesting, I think, in the tone. And I think that's part of this, I think, is, again, another important context here is the harmony of religions. Because again and again, he's criticizing one-sidedness and religious fundamentalism and fanaticism. And often that comes from thinking that because I have realized God is Christ, therefore God is only Christ. Because I have realized God is Allah, therefore God can only be Allah. Because I have realized God is Krishna, Krishna is the greatest and the best. And you see, that's another form of ego or arrogance, right? And he's pushing against that and saying, like, don't ever limit God to what you have understood or realized of God. Because God is always beyond what you've understood of him or even realized of him. Bhagavan kono iti nai. You can never put a limit to God. All right. So let's continue. Okay, so I hope you see the difference between Vidyasagar and... Vidyasagar says, like Kant, God is strictly unknowable. You can't even know any aspect. You can't know God as Krishna, you can't know God as Christ, you can't know God as Brahman. Forget about it. Allah, nothing. Tough luck. Our minds are fundamentally limited. Sri Ramakrishna says, you can realize God as Christ or as Allah, as Vishnu, as any number of things. Nirguna Brahman. Some people, Vigyanis, are capable of even realizing God in multiple aspects, forms. That's why he says, have I gotten to Shukadeva yet? Huh?
Yeah, I said big ants.
Yeah, big ants. And it says 8 to 10 grains of sugar. Not 0 and not infinite, but 8 to 10. Multiple aspects, forms of God. Like Sri Ramakrishna himself. How do we know? Because if you read Sri Ramakrishna's divine play, Leela Prasanga, in the sadhana period, he practiced many different sadhanas, realized God as Sita, Hanuman, Krishna, Radha, Brahman, in the sense of non-dual pure consciousness, under Totapuri. So many different, Kali obviously, his Ishtadevata, right? So all these. But even he never claimed to know the whole of God, you see? Okay, so now let's continue. And this is the start of a new section, yet another subsection, and it goes... The Bangla is Brahma Shochitananda Swarup, Nirvikalpa Samadhi or Brahma Gyan. Brahman is of the Swarupa, the essence of Satchit Ananda, existence, consciousness, bliss, and then Nirvikalpa Samadhi or Brahma Gyan. Nirvikalpa Samadhi and Brahma Gyana, knowledge of Brahman. Okay, I think this is fine as a section heading. So, he says, Sri Ramakrishna says, as for what has been said in the Vedas and the Puranas, do you know what it is like? Suppose a man has seen the ocean and somebody asks him, well, what is the ocean like? The first man opens his mouth as wide as he can and says, what a sight, what tremendous waves and sounds. The description of Brahman in the sacred books is like that. It is said in the Vedas that Brahman is of the nature of bliss. It is Satchit Ananda. Shuka and other sages stood on the shore of this ocean of Brahman and saw and touched the water. According to one school of thought, they never plunged into it. Those who do cannot come back to the world again. We have to come back to this, but let's just keep that in mind. In Samadhi, let me finish the section, then we'll. In Samadhi, one attains the knowledge of Brahman. One realizes Brahman. He's thinking of Nirvikalpa Samadhi. In that state, reasoning stops altogether, and man becomes mute. He has no power to describe the nature of Brahman. Once a salt doll went to measure the depth of the ocean. All laugh. It wanted to tell others how deep the water was, but this it could never do. For no sooner did it get into the water than it melted. Now, who was there to report the ocean's depth? A devotee. Suppose a man has obtained the knowledge of Brahman in Samadhi. Doesn't he speak anymore? Master. Shankaracharya retained the ego of knowledge in order to teach others. I think a slightly better translation would be, it's Vidyarami. I think ego in English has a slightly negative connotation, or often does, and so I think it might just be better and more neutral to say the eye of knowledge. Letter I. Shankaracharya retained the eye of knowledge in order to teach others. After the vision of Brahman, a person becomes silent. He reasons about it as long as he has not realized it. If you heat butter in a pan on the stove, it makes a sizzling sound as long as the water it contains has not dried up. But when no trace of water is left, the clarified butter makes no sound. If you put an uncooked cake of flour in that butter, it sizzles again. But after the cake is cooked, all sound stops. Just so, a man established in Samadhi comes down to the relative plane of consciousness in order to teach others, and then he talks about God. The bee buzzes as long as it is not sitting on a flower. It becomes silent when it begins to sip the honey. But sometimes, intoxicated with the honey, it buzzes again. An empty pitcher makes a gurgling sound when it is dipped in water. When it fills up, it becomes silent. all laugh. But if the water is poured from it into another pitcher, then you will hear the sound again. Gug, 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 gug. Laughter. Okay, so this is as far as I wanted to get, and now there's quite a bit to discuss here. Let's go back to this first statement that I already highlighted. Those who plunge into Brahman in the state of Nirvikalpa Samadhi cannot come back to the world again. He says this even more explicitly in a number of other places in the Gospel, the famous 21-day teaching, Ekus dine mrittu, ekus dine dehotag, which means within 21 days, if you are in the state of Nirvikalpa Samadhi, your body will fall off within 21 days. One obvious question that comes up then is, well, there are a lot of people who claim to have come back from the state of Nirvikalpa Samadhi. What's an example? Totapuri. When he came to Sri Ramakrishna, he had already attained the state of Nirvikalpa Samadhi. How is that possible? So now, there are a couple things to keep in mind here. Again, as I said, the best way to understand Sri Ramakrishna's teachings, in my opinion, is to try to read them comprehensively. And so that means, to understand any one of his teachings, it's better to actually have knowledge of the entire book, the whole gospel. That's why it helps to just read and reread the same text over and over again. Because then the moment you read the ant parable, then you can link it with the chameleon parable and the blind man and the elephant parable like that. Okay, so now, with regard to this, he says, and this is, I quote this in my book, Infinite Paths. I'm just going to read out to you the passage. He says, he distinguishes between two categories of jiva, of soul, jiva kotis and ishvara kotis. Jiva kotis are ordinary souls. Ishvara kotis are, and he gives a very precise definition of ishvara koti. They are avatar ba avatarer angsho. They are either incarnations of God or those born as parts of an incarnation. Avatarer angsho, amshas of an avatara. Swamiji, Brahmananda, these are Ishvara. Sri Ramakrishna himself named them Ishvara kotis, 6 as Ishvara kotis. As an example. Now, in that context, he says, when the Kundalini rises to the Sahasrara and the mind goes into Samadhi, Nirvikalpa Samadhi, the aspirant loses all consciousness of the outer world. He can no longer retain his body. If milk is poured into his mouth, it runs out again. In that state, death occurs within 21 days. But the Ishvara kotis, such as the incarnations of God, can come down from the state of Samadhi. They can descend from this exalted state because they like to live in the company of devotees and enjoy the love of God. God retains in them the eye of knowledge, Biddarami, or the eye of devotion, Bhaktirami, so that they may teach people. Their minds move between the 6th and the 7th planes. They run a boat race back and forth, as it were, between these two planes. So I think this is really important, this passage, to understand what he's saying. And now let's come back to this teaching of his. So, we enter the state of Nirvikalpa Samadhi. Some people remain in that state for up to 21 days, and then what happens? Leave the body. Why do they leave the body? Because they haven't had food in 21 days. I mean, that's the physiological explanation. Nobody can survive without water, at least. You can survive without food for 21 days, but not water. Okay. These are ordinary souls. Now, but what about Totapuri? Was he an Ishvara Koti? Or was he a Jiva Koti? He came back from the state of Nirvikalpa Samadhi. I don't think we should jump to the conclusion that anybody who comes back from the state of Nirvikalpa Samadhi is automatically, ipso facto, an Ishvara Koti. Why do I think that? Because I think that it's important. I think the teaching has to be interpreted correctly. Here's my suggestion, and you can argue with me. I think what he means is, the vast majority of people who attain the state of Nirvikalpa Samadhi don't and can't remain in it for 21 days. They're forced to come back, or they choose to come back, depending on... Most people... Totapuri was not in the state of Nirvikalpa Samadhi for 21 days before he came to Sri Ramakrishna. He was there for a few moments, maybe a few hours. So, I think that the best way to interpret what Sri Ramakrishna is saying, when he says that within 21 days, in the state of Nirvikalpa Samadhi, one leaves the body. What it means is, not that if you stay in the state of Nirvikalpa Samadhi for one day, your body will drop off. Not that. If you are in such a state of mind that you enter the state of Nirvikalpa Samadhi, and you remain in that state for 21 days. Then the body will drop off. But the majority of people can't stay in the state of Nirvikalpa Samadhi for 21 days at a stretch. Their own karma will force them to come back to this world. How do I know this? And where am I getting this from? Even classical Advaita Vedanta texts like Jivan Mukti Viveka, and it's mentioned, Madhusudana Saraswati mentions it in his commentary on the Gita, Gurartha Deepika, and other places. They distinguish three stages in the knowledge of Brahman. Okay. First stage, Brahmavid, the knower of Brahman, who goes into the state of Nirvikalpa Samadhi, but as a result of his or her own prarabdha karma, remaining karma, that karma forces them to come back. Even if they want to stay in the state of Nirvikalpa Samadhi, they can't. They're forced to come back. I see Totapuri as falling into that category before he met Sri Ramakrishna, maybe. Second stage, slightly higher knower of Brahman, Brahmavit Variyan. This is the person who, in the state of Nirvikalpa Samadhi, that person doesn't come back from that state on his or her own because of his own karma, but somebody else has to whisper a mantra into that person's ear or somehow, and then it comes back down. Ramakrishna, it's complicated. Avatars throw a whole wrench in all these things. But third and highest stage of knower of Brahman, Brahmavit Varishtha, the person who enters a state of Nirvikalpa Samadhi and never comes back from it. So in classical Advaita, actually, the highest stage of knowledge of Brahman is one in which you never come back. Why? Why is that true? Think about it. Because classical Advaita Vedanta says that this world is unreal. That means that the physical body is also unreal. So if I come back to the body and see this illusory, even if I see the world as a dream, I'm still seeing it. There's still an appearance of this world. And that itself suggests that there's a slight, at least a slight trace of ignorance in me that makes me come back to this world. And I'm still stuck in this dream. It's like, imagine being in a dream. Most people are in a dream and don't know they're dreaming, right? That's how most of us dream. Some people dream lucidly, at least once in a while. Some people. And you can get trained to be a lucid dreamer now. And enjoy whatever you want in your dreams. Okay. So the lucid dreamer is the one who's dreaming and knows he or she is dreaming. But he's still in the dream, and it's not always easy to, if you just want to get out, imagine it's a nightmare. I'm lucidly dreaming in a nightmare. I want to get the heck out of the nightmare, but I'm stuck, and it's terrifying, just imagine, right? So the ideal is not to be in the dream at all, right? Lucid dreaming is not the ideal. You can think of the Jivan Mukta, the one who comes back from the state of Nirvikalpa Samadhi, as a kind of Jivan Mukta, a lucid dreamer, but the highest is not being in the dream at all. Waking up from the dream is higher than even lucid dreaming. Do you see? Which is the equivalent of Videha Mukti, leaving the physical body. Good riddance to it. You see what I mean? Okay, so now, coming back to this issue. Now the thing is, why do I bring up all this? See, I actually think that Sri Ramakrishna's philosophy cannot be pigeonholed into classical Advaita Vedanta. But I mention it because his teaching that in the state of Nirvikalpa Samadhi, if one remains in that state for 21 days, the body will drop off. That's strictly in accordance with classical Advaita Vedanta. It's not that he's deviating from it. He accepts that teaching. At the same time, he adds something that you don't find in classical Advaita Vedanta. This distinction between Ishvara Kotis and Jiva Kotis. In fact, many monks have tried, and scholars have tried to trace this distinction between Ishvara Kotis and Jiva Kotis to some scriptural source, like the Upanishads. It's very hard to find. I don't know. Even where does that term come from? It's not clear. It may have been Divine Mother herself directly telling Sri Ramakrishna. We don't know. Or maybe somebody else knows it in the audience and can edify me. So what does he say? Ishvara Kotis are not like an ordinary Jivan Mukta who comes back from the state of Samadhi because of his or her own prarabdha karma. No. Because an Ishvara Koti is an incarnation of God or a portion of an incarnation. And so it's by Mother's will, the will of Divine Mother. And in Sri Ramakrishna's own life, we see this. How do we know this? Because when he's in this state of Nirvikalpa Samadhi, and that sadhu comes once in a while and forces milk down his throat to keep his body going, finally, Sri Ramakrishna, and he's in that state for 6 months. 6 months. But body doesn't drop off, partly because he's getting that food from that sadhu, thankfully. And then finally, though, and he's ready to give up his body, Divine Mother herself says, Bhavamukha Thakur. Remain in the state of Bhavamukha, she tells him. You see. And then he comes down, retaining what? There are two different kinds of I that you can retain when you come back from the state of samadhi as an Ishvarakoti. Biddarami, which means the eye of knowledge, or Bhaktirami, the eye of devotion. Which one did he retain? Arguably both. Oh. But I would say more so Bhaktirami, because that was his main bhava. And also because he defines Biddarami in the context of Shankaracharya, who taught that this world is an illusion. But he also taught that to people who had Advaitic leanings. And so in a way, he kind of retained both. But he said that Shankara retained the eye of knowledge, which is also very interesting, because then another question comes, well, then was Shankara a Vijnani? I think yes. Although there might be a very slight hair-splitting distinction between Vijnani and Ishvarakoti. And it might be that Ishvarakoti is a slightly broader category than Vijnani. And that he definitely considered Shankara to be an Ishvarakoti. But I don't know. I want this, I mean, you guys can also do research on your own and tell me. But it seems to me when Sri Ramakrishna defines the Vijnani, he defines the Vijnani as retaining the eye of devotion. I don't see him ever saying that the Vijnani can also retain the eye of knowledge. He says the Ishvarakoti can retain the eye of knowledge when he comes back. The Ishvarakoti has two options when he comes back from the state of Nirvikalpa Samadhi. You either retain the eye of knowledge or the eye of devotion. I think that he defines the Vijnani as a subset of Ishvarakoti who retains the eye of devotion. Is this too complicated? I think that this is just my hunch from reading the Kathamrita, probably for the, I don't know, 7th time. But I'm curious to hear your thoughts about this. So I think Sri Ramakrishna's view is that Shankara was an Ishvarakoti who retained the eye of knowledge, but not a Vijnani in the sense of, if he defines Vijnani as somebody who retains the eye of devotion. And then you'll say, but what about Shankara's devotional hymns? And then I'll say that we don't know that they're his. And secondly, I'll say that even if they were his, then you are left with this difficult problem of reconciling what he says in those devotional hymns with what he says in his commentaries about bhakti, which is not quite as flattering. Okay. That's more or less it. Okay, so questions from the in-person or online? Yeah, Anish. Please hand the mic over to them.
This doctrine of levels is very Shaiva in the sense that we have this Sapta Pramatarvada. But there, the difference is that, on the hierarchy, Sakala, Pralaya Kala, Vignya Kala, they can go up. And so I'm thinking of Shivananda Maharaj's statement that Thakur made me an Ishvarakoti. Yeah. So the question is, can one qualify from being a Jivakoti through the grace of God into becoming
that's a nice question. Yeah. So he's referring to a letter of Mahapurush Maharaj, Shivanandaji, who says, Sri Ramakrishna didn't give me the stamp of an Ishvarakoti. He only gave 6 people the stamp of an Ishvarakoti. So imagine the look on the face of the other people. But anyway, then Shivananda says, but by his grace, I've been elevated to the status of an Ishvarakoti, which means that the categorization of Jivakoti versus Ishvarakoti may not be as rigid as we might initially think, and that it's possible that the categories might be a little bit more fluid. And I personally feel as a devotee, but not as a scholar, because I have to be more objective and neutral as a scholar, but as a devotee, that with the advent of Sri Ramakrishna, he has sort of democratized the state of Vijnana and the possibility of becoming an Ishvarakoti. That something that was only available to a tiny minority of spiritual aspirants in the past has now been universalized or made much more accessible to a larger swath of humanity. That's my
favorite thing that you said.
Okay, well, there you go. Thank you. Okay, so any other questions in person before I assume there might be some questions online? I got one. Okay, Nish has another one. But anyone else here first? We don't want the man to monopolize the whole conversation. Anyone else? More mansplaining. Okay, go ahead.
So to avoid lazy harmonization, so the idea of a jiva attaining a very high state, qualifying as an Ishvarakoti, and then choosing to come back for the purposes of teaching, So like the pot being emptied out. How does that compare to, or does that at all compare to like the Vajrayana Buddhist Bodhisattva idea, the Mahayana Buddhist
But you
Bodhisattva?
said the ordinary jiva or the Ishvara Koti? Because that should be the Ishvara Koti, right?
Because the Ishvara Koti is Avatara Angsha. It's like the directionality is different. Right? They're on the other side of Maya coming in. I mean, a Jiva Koti who is here, who ascends to a certain state, like the wall parable, he doesn't jump over. Because that man is not actually, he sees but doesn't jump over, right? But he comes back.
Yeah.
How
I
do
think that's the Ishvara Koti, though.
That's, oh,
I don't
really?
think that's an ordinary soul.
But he doesn't go over, though.
I know.
Oh, but he's an Ishvara Koti.
Yeah. Oh, wait. I think you're missing one part of his teaching. The people who, after 21 days in the state of samadhi, leave the body.
Jiva
they're
Kotis.
but they're ordinary souls.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah, Jiva Kotis.
Yeah, Jiva Kotis.
But if you come back after the 21-day period,
True.
then that automatically makes you an Ishvara Koti.
Ishvara Koti. And how does that compare to like the Bodhisattva doctrine? Because there they are actually in samsara. And then they become free and they stay and help. The Ishvara Koti is like the Homa bird. He's never really in samsara.
Yeah, but in another sense he is, right? Swamiji,
Right.
I mean, there's kind of that dual thing, right? Because even Sri Ramakrishna was about to kill himself because he hadn't realized Kali. How do you explain any of that? Swamiji was very frustrated after Sri Ramakrishna left his body and was, wanted to realize God. What does it mean? He himself is an Ishvara Koti. He is God. He's Shiva himself. So I think the Bodhisattva, you can say, from a Buddhist Mahayana standpoint, the Bodhisattva, on the one hand, I think that it probably gets complicated exegetically if you look at the texts. Some might say that they're ever perfect and ever free. Others will say that there's a period when they are in bondage and then but even that bondage could be a kind of play of the Bodhisattva. I'm not sure. I have to look at the text and, yeah, thank you. Other questions? Anyone else in person? Yes, please, Jit.
Ramakrishna wanted to kill himself, right? He said he didn't realize.
Yeah, he was about to commit suicide.
But didn't he have samadhi before even, when he tried to kill himself? Like when he was a boy, he fainted.
Oh, well, that's true.
So he had those experiences, right?
And he experienced
did he say,
oneness with Shiva when he was playing Shiva in that play.
Yeah, but that's when he was a kid. But even when he was adult, he still had those experiences, right? Or he didn't know. Why was he like that? I mean, I'm going to kill myself.
That's an interesting
It was
question.
1 grain of sugar and he wanted the whole hill.
Maybe.
Because it's not like right after that he started getting samadhis. He was getting even before that. My assumption is this.
Yeah, and there are some, as you point out, some documented.
And then I also read,
incidents.
I think this book on Holy Mother. Maybe Holy Mother was saying in that book, she didn't write, but that whenever he had those experiences, he said to her that if I have those kind of things, just say Shiva or something like that in my ears.
Right. Certain mantras.
Certain mantras. So he also said that.
Yeah. There's also an interesting question about the nature of that first experience he had right when he was about to slit his throat. Because it's very striking. He has been worshipping Kali as the Kali as we know it, presumably. Praying to her, speaking to her, singing Ramprasad songs, right? But what's the vision like? He says, waves of consciousness engulfed me until I couldn't breathe, and then I lost external consciousness altogether. And then when I came back to the relative plane, I said, Mother, Mother. So this is very interesting. He's engulfed by an infinite sea of consciousness, of light and consciousness. Seems almost like impersonal or something, like he's certainly not seeing a form of God. But then he comes back and says, Mother, Mother. And then even among the direct disciples, this is anecdotal. There's no documentary evidence of this, but there's a kind of story handed down to us, that there's a debate between even some of the direct disciples about the precise nature of this first spiritual experience of Sri Ramakrishna. After that, when he took the scabbard, the sword from the scabbard. Sharanandaji, arguably, in the Divine Play, suggests that this is not the highest experience. He goes on to have higher experiences, including Nirvikalpa Samadhi when he was doing Advaitic Sadhana and other things. Vijnana experience, right, in the state of Bhavamukha. Ramakrishnanandaji, again, anecdotal, because we don't have any texts of Ramakrishnanandaji where he says this, but this is a statement ascribed to him. He argues that that first experience is Vijnana, it's the highest. He realized the whole kit and caboodle right then and there. And I'm sort of like lean toward that view, partly because if you look at the Lila Prashango, the Sri Ramakrishna's Divine Play, Sharanandaji's biography, after he has that experience, then Sri Ramakrishna says he felt an insatiable desire to realize that same Mother Kali in many different forms. And he prayed to Mother Kali, now show me your form as Christ, show me your form as Krishna, show me your form as... But always knowing, see, how do you have the knowledge? How could he possibly have had the knowledge that Christ and Allah and Krishna and Vishnu and Kali are all the same God, different manifestations of the same God, unless he already had the knowledge of the infinite God, not the whole of God, but at least God in multiple aspects and forms, this infinite ocean of consciousness, which manifests as different forms of God. Do you see what I mean? So that's why I'm inclined to think that Ramakrishnanandaji is right about this, and that first, it's very interesting. You should go back to the Divine Play and just look at the description, Sri Ramakrishna's own description of that first experience. It's quite striking. I like to think of it as a Vijnana kind of experience, which has both bhakti and jnana elements, both impersonal, personal, with form, without form, kind of everything combined into it. Okay? Any online questions?
There's one.
Okay, let's hear the one online question, and then we'll wrap it up.
Uh-oh, there's another one now.
Okay.
Many saints like Swami Samart from Maharashtra, India, said they are around in that location where they took Jiva Samadhi. So what sort of samadhi is that?
Jiva Samadhi?
Samadhi.
Jiva Samadhi?
Yeah.
I don't know, honestly. I'm not sure. I have to look at the text, and I've never heard of that. Okay, any second question?
Second question, how would Ramakrishna define Maya?
Right, okay. So as I said, well, there are a couple ways. There are certain places where he gives, like Christ has Lord's Prayer, how we should pray, he gives an example. Sri Ramakrishna has his own Lord's Prayer. You know what it is, right? Many kinds, but one of them is, I don't want bodily pleasures, O Mother. I don't want name and fame. I don't want the 8 occult powers. O Mother, bless me that I may have pure love for your lotus feet. And then the last part of this prayer. And, O Mother, bless me so that don't delude me with your world-bewitching Maya. Bhuvana Mohini Maya. Okay, I think this is the Avidya Maya. So basically you're praying to Divine Mother not to delude you with her Avidya Maya aspect. But at the same time, we have to remember that his more general teaching from the standpoint of Vijnana is God herself, Divine Mother herself, has become both Avidya Maya and Vidya Maya. And so to understand his definition of Maya, you have to understand that Maya encompasses both Vidya and Avidya. Avidya Maya consists in all of those things, those selfish qualities, those egoistic qualities that take us further away from God. And Vidya Maya are all of those qualities like devotion and renunciation and discrimination between the real and the unreal, etc., which bring us closer to God. Both of those are aspects of Maya. Both of those are real manifestations of God. It's all part of God's play, God's Leela. That's how I understand Maya. And you can overcome Avidya Maya as a spiritual aspirant by taking the help of Vidya Maya. And then ultimately you have to get rid of both the thorns. And he uses the example of the thorns, right? And he says you have a thorn in your foot. How do you remove it? You take a second thorn to take out the first thorn. And then you have to go beyond, he says, go beyond jnana and agyana. Go beyond knowledge and ignorance. And what is that? The state of vijnana. Okay, yeah. Okay, one last question. Yeah, Vijaya? Mike?
Can you recite that prayer in the Bengali?
Sharanagato, Sharanagato. It means, I take refuge in you, O Mother. Ami dehoshuk chaina, dehoshuk, dehasuka. Ami lokomanno chaina. I don't want name and fame. Ami ashtashiddhi chaina ma. Mother, I don't want even the 8 occult powers. Tomar Shri Padapodde amai shuddha bhakti dao. Give me pure love for your lotus feet. Ar tomar bhuvana mohini maya amake mugdho karo na. And don't delude me with your world bewitching Maya. Okay? She's happy now. Okay. Thank you, everyone. See you guys next month. I hope. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat. Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.